What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the Pick Swap Media YouTube channel. My name is Sean Barnard, and I'm back after an eventful weekend in the Philadelphia 76ers world. Despite it being the dead of the offseason, summer league now wrapped up, everything pretty much gone, and just no basketball going on. The Sixers continue to find themselves in the headlines, and this time due to Joel Embiid stirring the pot of not only the Sixers world, but the NBA world as a whole by somewhat hinting at his desire to leave Philly for the first time really in his career. And then Daryl Morey hopping on 97.5 The Fanatic to talk with Anthony Gargano. I just went and listened to that whole thing, tweeted some of my takeaways. So I want to dive through some of my biggest thoughts on both of these and where we're at for the state of the franchise. So let's get into it.
Embiid driving, spinning, fading. 1.1 to go. Oh my goodness, Tyrese Maxey.
Daniel House fills the lane and fills it up.
All right, so first things first, what stirred the whole pot of this thing was Joel Embiid with these comments. I'm sure most of you guys have seen it now, but I do want to play this video here of exactly what Joel Embiid said. This brought up by AJ Torres first off, so shout out to him for finding this clip, and I do want to just play it here.
What can we look forward from Joel Embiid?
I just want to win a championship. Whatever it takes. I don't know where that's going to be, whether it's at Philly or, everywhere else. I just want to have a chance to accomplish that. I want to see what it feels like to win that first one and then think about, the next one. It's not easy, but, it takes more than, 1, 2, 3 guys. Gotta have, good people around you. And, like myself, every single day I work hard to, be at that level so I can produce and make it happen. So every single day that's, walking towards that.
So that was the comment right there. And obviously the comment saying that I just want to win a championship, whether it's in Philly or anywhere else, is what kind of raised some eyebrows, because that is the first time that Joel Embiid has somewhat expressed a desire or hinted at some unhappiness in the city of Philadelphia. Since he has been drafted by the Sixers, he has very much been one of these guys that have embraced his homegrown organization, been cut much more of the mold of a Dame Lillard or a Bradley Beal or Tim Duncan, Kobe Bryant, Dirk Nowitzki, that style of player who has a desire to stick with one team. And Joel Embiid, more than any player, I would even extend this beyond basketball. I think any player in any sport, he means much more to an organization than anyone else. And the reason that I say that is the only guys in the NBA that I'll hear out the argument for is Nikola Jokic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Dame Lillard, and Steph Curry. Outside of that, I really don't see anybody close. And the reason that I say Embiid is a notch above those guys, because in all the other circumstances, it is the organization builds an infrastructure for this player and that he develops into the guy that he grows to be, the superstar that he develops into. In the Joel Embiid situation, he is the infrastructure. This guy was brought in here 3 GMs ago, 2 coaches ago, 150 plus players. He's literally had general managers tweeting at him through a burner. We've seen just a million different bizarre circumstances, and through it all, Joel Embiid has been the stability of the franchise. Now, I get it. It also comes in poor taste that I understand the frustrations. There's been a lot of very stupid takes about this conversation. I'm not going to call people out by name, but I've seen a ton of people overreacting on both sides of the spectrum. But the biggest thing that I'll say is frustrating and that I do agree with is it is in poor taste by Embiid to be complaining about this, given the fact that he plays an integral part in reaching that goal, that he, more so than anyone on this team, is a key reason why or why not they can reach that championship aspirations. And frankly, he has not delivered when it's mattered most. And that is a conversation that needs to look himself in the mirror and have this summer. It may not be this version of Joel Embiid is what gets a championship done. Now, I'm not rejecting the notion that you can't win a championship with Joel Embiid, which many people have jumped. I absolutely think you can win a championship with Joel Embiid. This man is the reigning MVP. He's one of the top talents across the entire sport of basketball. But there are adaptations to his game that he needs to make. I think the best version of him on the basketball court may not be the scoring champion Joel Embiid that we've seen the past 2 years, of him pouring in 33 points per game, of leading the NBA in scoring. Maybe it isn't this offensively dominant figure. He's a guy that, since he came in the NBA, has expressed the desire to compete and win Defensive Player of the Year awards. I want to see what that version of Joel Embiid looks at. Maybe we scale back the scoring a little bit. Maybe you're not a 33-point per game guy. Maybe you're a 20 to 25-point per game guy, but you dominate on the rebounds and you're a force defensively. This guy that when he flips it and he is all in and invested on that side of the floor, I find it hard pressed to name a player better than him on the defensive end. He's every bit the rim protector that a guy like Rudy Gobert is, with much more advanced ability to move on the perimeter. He can keep with guards when he's locked in out there. He really is a special combination of talent, and we haven't seen that version of him enough. And I get it. To be fair to Joel, there's so much on his plate. And also to be fair to him, that the only reason that I can see him willingly taking a step back offensively is if there's a better option to score. If he can hand these reins to somebody. These Sixers still need to score points if it is not Joel Embiid doing it. And in fairness to Joel, the best option has been him doing it himself. So it does require Tyrese Maxey continuing to develop. It does require James Harden not holding the ball for 20 out of 24 seconds on the shot clock every possession down the floor. So this has to be a give and take. It's not just as clean. We can nitpick this about Joel. But back to the comments itself, is this isn't an awesome sign. Like, you definitely don't want to hear him saying these things. I'm not as sound alarms panic as a lot of people, but this should be a message received by the Sixers front office. These were had at a fairly private event. I don't think these were comments that he expected to get out, but he said them nonetheless. And he is too smart to be walking around just letting things fly without the realization that in today's day and age, it might get out, because it absolutely did. And it has caused quite a ruckus all around. Now, Daryl Morey, in his interview on 97.5 The Fanatic, did kind of laugh it off. He did brush it off. And his exact quote, which I have here about the Daryl Morey. Actually, let me share my screen so you guys can see it as well. He didn't take any seriousness to it. He really kind of brushed it under the rug, and I'll get the exact quote right here. He said, quote, "He had some fun with that yesterday. That was a very Joel day." And Morey also said that he and Nurse spoke to Embiid at length yesterday, and they're confident he is bought in on winning with the Sixers. So that was Morey's main message, and I want to touch on a little bit more of what Morey said. For starters, jumping on, and shout out Morey to jumping and I guess taking the bull by the horns and addressing things, because there's a lot of GMs that would just hide, would rather not be stepping to the spotlight in the way he does. He even mentioned when he first came on that Dave Scholler, who is the PR guy for the Sixers, the guy that controls a lot of things there, the media presses everything, a very nice guy in general. But he did not want Daryl Morey popping on, at least until summer league's over. Morey's one of the most, I guess, forward-facing general managers and front office personnel in all of sports, which I do respect about him. And he also does not dodge questions in the way that we see from a lot of personnel and just people across sports in general. So when asked about the James Harden situation right away, the first thing that he was asked, he said, quote, "James is a very good player, and right now, unfortunately, he would prefer to be somewhere else." Morey said he will do his best to honor it, but the Sixers intend on making a deal that benefits the team and will not make a trade otherwise. To double down on that, there were a couple other quotes in there, and he said, quote, "We need more talent, whether that's James returning or what we turn James into." Says if there's not a deal on the table that puts these Sixers in a better position, quote, "they simply won't do it." Emphasized that judging the roster as a finished product, not what is there. There's been a lot of talk about, all these centers on roster, all these pieces in place. That was one of Morey's clear messages in here, is don't judge this roster as it is currently constructed. There is still a lot of moving parts. So that was a little refreshing to hear, to see that mindset, to understand that that's where his thought process is. And it is the right place, because also, in fairness to Daryl Morey, how this James Harden situation resolves itself plays a drastic impact on what the roster looks like. For example, if they are trading James Harden for a package of role players, then they shouldn't be in the market trying to sign a Kelly Oubre right now. But if you are taking that superstar swing, then you need guys like that. So I think Morey is trying to figure out the clarity on making sure this works, figuring out what pieces are in, because the needs just drastically do change depending on how that resolved. Now, I'm also not super optimistic that this is resolved as easily as possible. He also brought up Pat Beverly quite a bit. That is one of the additions that he has made this offseason, referred to both Beverly and PJ Tucker as winners. Look, I'm not a guy that dismisses the impact of leadership and that dog mindset and all those things. I do think it's important. I do think the Sixers have lacked that, but that's not the main reason that they're losing. That there is talent still does win out. I'm happy Patrick Beverly is here. I'm happy to have another ball handler on roster, a guy that can serve as a point guard, a guy that can run the offense when needed. If there is not a James Harden there, if there's just moments where Tyrese Maxey does not look quite ready to run the offense like that, he might be better as just being a score-first guy. That's what he's been so far in his career. I personally am not writing it off that that's only what he can do, because frankly, every time that he's challenged, he has delivered. And I think if that's the role the Sixers need him to serve, he can step up and do it. But having this ability with Patrick Beverly there is a great thing. And that was one of the clear takeaways throughout the interview, was that he is very excited about Patrick Beverly being a part of this team. And to address Tyrese Maxey specifically, Daryl Morey says that he did not want to put a ceiling on Maxey's potential due to all the development that he has shown, but said, quote, "he definitely has all-star ability." And he also clarified that holding off the contract extension was due to a focus to creating additional max slot next offseason. That was another huge takeaway from Morey in this interview, is that he reinforced that the Sixers could be the only team in the NBA next offseason. He brought up the CBA, all the stuff that comes with it, all these loose ends that are very frustrating, hard to wrap your mind around. But the bottom line is that is the benefit of pushing off this Tyrese Maxey contract extension, is you allow that flexibility moving forward. If they do reach this plan, and I even think one of the holdups on the Paul Reed contract was that Daryl Morey wanted literally no money on the books outside of Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey looking ahead to next season. Paul Reed, $8 million. Great deal for him, great value for him based on how the contracts flow in the NBA nowadays and where he stands up. If you look at where his contract ranks amongst other players in the NBA, that's great value for a guy who was given very positive minutes and been the only positive backup center come playoff time for the Sixers. So I get it. It sounds weird to see Paul Reed getting paid $8 million, but based on the state of the league and how guys are getting paid, that's a bargain for the talent that he is. So I do think that was one of the holdups on getting a deal done, as Morey did not want any money on the books for that. But you know what? You got to take guys, and frankly, Paul Reed is a useful player basically regardless of the circumstance. But that point on keeping that flexibility is something Morey has brought up quite a few times, and having that max slot ability. Now, I'm not as on board with this plan as Morey clearly is. I get the flexibility. I get all those things are great, but to me, they're great in theory. It's the same kind of principle of like you have this max slot, but if it doesn't turn in anything, then it's nothing. Like, I don't know. I'm not as bought in, and we're also just not seeing stars leave teams and free agents in the way. And frankly, next year's free agent class isn't blowing your brains out. It's not all these can't miss prospects. Jaylen Brown potentially, if there's no supermax sign there. Pascal Siakam potentially, but I don't think he is this all-world talent that would get these Sixers over the top. Guys like that. So I'm not as high on that as it happens. And as I mentioned, we just don't see stars leaving free agency. That we see much more of the Dame Lillard situations, which is playing out in Portland, or Bradley Beal, where they sign this max contract, this hefty money, and then demand a trade. The system's broken. It's not how it's supposed to be, but that's how things are going. So you do kind of have to adjust by that. So I think that was a huge point of Daryl Morey. And overall, from the takeaways from today, I think it is just like, everybody take a deep breath. That was Morey's clearest message, that the work is not done. There is plenty still to be figured out about what is going on with this franchise. There's plenty of questions still to be answered, but the day by day that they're still figuring out. I do want to bring up one other thing that perked up my ears as far as Morey say, and this one was probably my biggest surprise out of anything he said. You don't have to take this in on, like, I guess, super highly, because obviously it did not happen. But Daryl Morey did hint at them attempting to go and get Cam Whitmore in the draft, which is pretty interesting to me. We obviously saw these Sixers not make a single selection in the draft. They did not have a pick going in. But this quote by Morey, and it was brought up on the draft as a whole. He obviously can't mention guys by name directly, but Daryl Morey says, quote, "There was another prominent player who fell in this year's draft that we were trying to move up for. I couldn't understand why they were falling, because I've seen him play live multiple times here in town." That means Cam Whitmore. That's a guy who played for Villanova, one of the only local top picks in this draft, and a guy who's looked terrific in Summer League. I get it's just Summer League. It's not ready to run victory laps, but he's a guy I like quite a bit. I think he's a high-level NBA player. He's effective off ball. I think he's a great part of the Rockets core that they're assembling there. So good for Cam Whitmore. Glad he landed on the Rockets. I think that's a good spot for him, but very interesting that Morey was that intrigued, and I frankly wish that they had found a way to get up there and get him, because I do think he's a good player. So that was interesting. Morey also threw a little bit of shade at his boy James Harden in this, and Joel as well. And this quote here, I think, raised some eyebrows, and it said, quote, "I think James is a little bit hard to play with at times. I think Joel is a little bit hard to play with at times. Both these guys are such dominant forces that they can be challenging for guys to play off of." I think that is accurate, but I was surprised to see Morey say that. And for the most part, he's been very complimentary of all these guys, but he does, give it to them when they need to hear it, I guess. So I was kind of interested to see that. He was also asked what he believes would be like an ideal pairing with Joel Embiid. That's been a hot topic of conversation, because frankly, they have not found it. James Harden has by far been the best ideal pairing as far as bringing out the best of him, complementary pieces. It's no coincidence that Joel has had the best 2 statistical seasons of his career with James Harden alongside him. Harden is getting him easier buckets than has ever been the case. That is why Embiid has led the league in scoring these past few years, is he's had access to points that he just hasn't in the past. Just simple things like making really good entry passes, or when Embiid gets low position, to be able to deliver him the ball in a place where he can utilize it and be effective. Those are things that James Harden has brought out, and things that I think need to be weighed considerably as we look to this next generation or era or just year of the Sixers roster, that you got to replace that getting the ball to Embiid has been a problem throughout his career. We haven't seen him, and some of this circles back to the Ben Simmons stuff with the spacing that was provided by him, by guys pounding the paint and not allowing the separation. But you can't replace that ability of passing that James Harden has. He's a guy who led the NBA in assists last year. So it isn't ideal that he is just walking. The frustrations are very clearly between Harden and the front office. It does not have to do with the teammates. That has been mentioned all around. I think Morey addressed that pretty head on too, that he kind of wore that he talked about the contractual stuff, that James was expecting something the Sixers weren't willing to deliver. And the last real topic of conversation that I thought was interesting that Morey brought up here, and it goes back to the Ben Simmons situation. There's obviously some parallels in the Harden and Simmons situation, in the same way that I think Morey is ready for the long game with James Harden, just as he was with Ben Simmons. But he was asked directly about the Tyrese Halliburton trade and if that was on the table. And the quote by Morey here is, "We turned over every rock there. The Harden trade was really the only one available." He also went on to, without naming any players, which of course he cannot do under the laws of the NBA. And, he's already been punished pretty heavily for tampering before. The most aggressive punishment for tampering in NBA history has landed on the Sixers for last year, the additions of PJ Tucker and Daniel House. But without naming any players, Morey mentioned that some players who have spoken out on thinking they were going to be traded here, which is Halliburton. Halliburton has brought that up on podcasts before, were guys that they push hard to get, but the deal wasn't on the table. My honest read on that, and I don't have any sourcing to me to this, but I believe likely the topic of conversation was that the Kings wanted more than just Ben Simmons for Tyrese Halliburton. Morey did not look at that the same way, that he thought Simmons should be in an A tier above Halliburton when it comes to trade values and the outlook of guys. And frankly, I mean, Ben Simmons, the value has straight up tanked, and he is the worst version of himself that he has probably ever been on a basketball court right now. So I get, like, you can't look at the eye for eye value right now, because on the other side of things, Tyrese Halliburton has continued to develop, taking his game to another level, and is really in the conversation for true NBA star at this point. So the value are definitely way off right now than they were at the time. But I do think Morey can make that case, talking about a guy who was a 3-time All-Star, a perennial all-defensive candidate. That was Ben Simmons. That is no longer the guy, so it sounds weird to look at now. But my read on that is that it would have required Ben Simmons and a little more, whether that was Maxey, which obviously is great that he's still in Philadelphia. I think it was that. I think Morey was way more willing for the Harden deal to give up Simmons and stuff for a guy that he knew for what he was. And also, as much as we are kicking ourselves for the deal now, and if it was on the table, it would have been the wrong move. If Halliburton was on the table, that would have been the right move. But the move was to flip into win now mode, to capitalize on Joel Embiid's pride. James Harden was a much more win now talent than Tyrese Halliburton. Halliburton still hasn't hit his peak as a player. And on one hand, that's very intriguing, that you love that he's still getting better, and that would have been a good thing. And looking at how things are, that's definitely a good thing. But frankly, it was a roll of dice that Joel Embiid has been as healthy as he has been. I think everyone is very grateful and a little bit surprised how healthy Embiid has been. This guy who exceeded 60 games last year, who was, even with the bumps and bruises, and obviously they've come at inopportune times, like the playoffs where he hasn't been able to bend himself. But for the most part, he has been on the court. And I do think that's going to be something that is scaled back this year, that he is not going to be playing as many games as we've seen the past 2 years, where Embiid has kind of taken it personally to make sure he's out there and try and squash this injury-prone narrative. But I do think it's time to reel it in a little bit. Make sure he is ready to play his best basketball in the postseason. That is the step that needs to be squashed. But the bottom line of all of this is that there is still a lot of work to do within the Sixers roster. Daryl Morey is far from finished with putting his fingerprints on this franchise. This could go down as the most important offseason in this era of Sixers basketball. I know I feel like I say that every single year, but you know what? It seems to keep getting even more important, and there could be even more disastrous results if they don't get this one right. So for now, I'm ready for the staring contest of James Harden and Daryl Morey. I'm ready for all the leaks that are going to come out on both sides. It is going to get frustrating. It is going to get old, but you know what? That's all we got right now. And if the Sixers do not get this right, I do think that those comments by Joel Embiid will be revisited and taken a little more seriously, because I don't think it's that far off from the Sixers and Embiid having a divorce and having a split. And on one hand, that's an okay situation to sit in for the Sixers, that you have that reset button, that he will obviously command a massive return on the trade market. But the goal is still to win. The goal is still to win a championship, and win a championship with Joel Embiid. So if you can find a way to right the ship, to correct this roster, to bring in some more pieces, to get this James Harden trade right, to find a Tobias Harris trade for better fitting players, there is still an opportunity to win with this franchise. So don't give up on this core yet. We're in it for the long haul. There's still a lot to be played out with this team, but overall, for now, we can just hang on to that. So appreciate all you guys for watching this. Make sure to drop a comment and your thoughts. Let me know what you think of Daryl Morey's outlook, which of his takeaways hit home for you. Please drop a like on this video, a subscribe to this channel, and I will talk to you next time. Sean Barnard signing off.